All right. Hello. Um, uh, I will be doing my presentation on labor issues for my final project. Yeah, let's get into it. If I can find the right key to press or click. Okay, there we go. Perfect. Um, so I'd like to begin by going uh, a little bit into how we got to the point we're at with labor issues in America. Um, the first thing to know about why things are kind of bad as far as workers' rights go in America is that, like many social injustices in this country, it can be traced back to Ronald Reagan. um, oh, in 1989, or excuse me, 1981, President Reagan fired over 11,000 striking air traffic controllers. This might not seem very relevant to today, but this is often considered the beginning of the decline for labor power and the labor movement in America. And I believe this is the beginning of how we got to the point we're at right now. Um, Decades later, the labor movement is still catching up. Um, and, well, things are looking up, though. In recent times, the labor movement has reached a pretty hopeful position, yet we still face some pretty big challenges with it. So, um, let's talk about some of the individual uh, impacts of the issues, the labor issues in America. So, I just went over how we're kind of behind in workers' rights in America. Uh, there hasn't been a lot of power behind the labor movement for a while, and this is the result. So, these are the common individual impacts that individual workers face due to the lack of uh, labor justice. Um, Wages have stagnated, but productivity has soared. According to CNBC, between 1979 and 2020, wages only grew by 17.5%. Meanwhile, productivity soared by 61.8% during that same period of time. Um, so American workers are 61.8% more productive, but they're only getting paid 17.5% more. Uh, all that extra profit that we've been generating over this time period does not go back into the pockets of the American worker. Um, Federal minimum wage, to that this goes with that last point. The federal minimum wage has stayed at 7.25 an hour. It has not been raised since 2009. Um, and then, according to the Census Bureau, 7.9% of people in the US don't have health insurance. That's 26 million people. Um, Now, I will make a little side note. Typically, I would not discuss health insurance as a workers' rights issue. I think it's more of a just flat out human rights issue. But in America, health insurance is treated as a benefit that you get at your workplace rather than a human right. Um, and so it's kind of, in the US at least, it is a workers' rights issue on top of a human rights issue. These issues were exacerbated by the pandemic. The low wages started not stretching quite as far as they used to after inflation and scarcity started after the pandemic. And then, in addition to that, um, it would be nice to have health insurance during a public health crisis. In the past, the labor movement would protect people's rights for things like these. But according to Pew Research, in the past 35 years, union membership has dropped by nearly half. And so I'd like to kind of draw attention to the fact that as union membership has dropped, uh, union membership started dropping at the same time that these problems started occurring, that the stagnation started occurring. So, um, here are some issues that the labor move or labor rights or labor issues face on an institutional level. Everything I just talked about uh, could also be fit into the category of an institutional injustice. All of those things could be legislated away. Um, uh, so there is also those individual impacts are the result of institutional stagnation and institutional injustice. Um, but in addition to everything I just talked about, there's also a few other things that should be addressed on an institutional level. New technology uh, may allow employers to exploit workers in ways that is not protected by the law. An example of this would be the actor strike that just happened. One of their biggest contentions was over AI stealing likenesses. Um, it stuff like this with new technologies that are coming about have not been legislated and are going to be opening the floodgates on some new ways of exploiting people in the coming years. In addition to that, some states are rolling back child labor laws. That one I would hope is a little self-explanatory. Um, it's it's bad. Yeah. Um, that issue in particular is going to affect impoverished families the most because, well, they're going to be the ones who need the extra income the most, so they'll be more likely to make their children work. Um, and going off of that, uh, intersectionality plays a role in all this. Labor is something that is shared among every group of people, and so um, as Crenshaw went into, um, since this is something that every group of people is affected by, any additional identities or groups that a person belongs to that also faces discrimination is only going to make the exploitation of their labor worse. Um, and it's has the compound effect. But it's not all doom and gloom. There are things that can be done. So let's get into that. On the institutional level, I have three main things that I think should be done. Uh, The laws concerning minimum wage and healthcare should be updated to match the standards of other developed nations on that are on the same level of the U.S. Uh, ex, Labor protections need to fit the new working standards. So new laws to address new technology, um, new laws that um, will prevent a backslide from the new things that uh, people have been enjoying since the pandemic. There's been new protections like working from home, stuff like that. That should be something that gets protected. Shouldn't be something that an employer just gets to take away, at least in my opinion. And then there could be better enforcement of labor protections. Um, it often falls on the individual to just know their rights. Um, and I think it would be nice if we could figure out ways to be more proactive with uh, preventing the violation of labor laws. And so now I'd like to go into some of the things that you can do on an individual level to help combat labor issues. Um, Obviously, the first and most obvious thing that a person could do to combat labor issues is to join or create a union if you don't have one available. Um, Unions use the collective power of the workers to get better working conditions. Um, this, yeah. So it can be a direct way for workers to get their rights protected by standing up and protecting them for themselves. Um, I'd also like to mention that uh, Brownstein talks about how um, it's important to focus on affecting change on a local level. Unions can be an effective way to make changes on a local level. Uh, they don't necessarily always extend their progress into the state or federal law level, but they can, at the very least, have a big impact on the local economies and do a lot to raise local living standards. Um, you know, like if there's two factories, one is unionized, one is not, the unionized factory might have better wages, which causes the other factory to raise theirs in response because they're still going to need workers. Stuff like that. Something else you could do is donate to strike funds or union funds. That one's pretty self-explanatory. Unions are not, they don't exist in a vacuum. They do need funding to be able to do the things that they do, and they accept donations. Now, two of the most important things that I think people can do uh, just on their own, away from any other organization, is you can normalize talking about your wages. Uh, this is something that is a very simple and straightforward way that workers can protect each other with. Um, you know, if your coworker is being screwed over by your boss, they're not going to know that unless you're talking about your wages or what benefits you have. Um, and, vice versa. And then finally, know your worth. It's important, as I mentioned before, uh, it often falls on the individual to just know what rights they have. And so it's important that workers educate themselves or are educated on what violates laws and what is allowed in a workplace. Um, a lot of workers end up accepting crummy positions or, bad working conditions just because they don't know that they don't have to. And so, uh, by knowing what is and is not acceptable and teaching others what is and is not acceptable on a on the most bare bones of individual level, we can help raise working standards and help combat labor issues. And so with that, I have some references for the articles I sourced. Um, and yeah, thank you.